Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to those beautiful halls of the Diplomatic Academy. My name is David Lansky. I'm the president of Club DA. Club DA is the Alumni Association, the Alumni Association of all students at the Diplomatic Academy. And in the name of Club DA, I would like to kindly greet you to this event, which we are very happy to be organizing in a great cooperation with the Rotary Club. And in the name of the Rotary Club, of course, also Vera, Strobachova, Budway is here, who will also be speaking some introductory words and introduce our speaker. Maybe if you don't mind, I would like to just maybe lose a few words about our organization, the Club DA, and then I will also proceed to give the word to Vera. From my side, I would like to say, as many of you may probably know, the Diplomatic Academy enables people from all types of disciplines to have a very broad understanding of big societal questions that we have. So one of the great things is that you may be learning some international law, but you will learn it in the historical context that it was relevant. Or you may be discussing some questions of international relations, but you'll also be talking about some of the economic implications that are behind them. Now, complex problems require a multidisciplinary approach. And that is not just the case with questions of diplomacy, but that is actually the case with many current questions that we have. This is why we at Club DA believe that the Diplomatic Academy really provides a foundation for a complex understanding of problems and also thus an intertwined development of solutions for them. So having that in mind, you know that the topic of today is one that is not only highly relevant, but it's also one that has been an issue in our world for many, many years. And if you just read, for example, the recent publication in Die Zeit, the weekly newspaper, one term that is, for example, discussed is the term of liberal imperialism. What is meant by liberal imperialism? Liberal imperialism is the connection of two concepts which at first sight seem like they're opposing. Liberal society is in an imperial way imposing, this is the claim, certain ideologies onto another. Now, that's obviously a very controversial statement, but this idea, this notion, allows a lively discussion around all types of questions, or many types of questions, which involve also the long and hardened history that Afghanistan has from Soviet until so-called Western implications in the country and implications for our entire world. So with this being said, and with those short words about the issue at hand, I want to also not only welcome our first combined event together with our dearest Rotary Club that is also so close to the Diplomatic Academy, but I would also like to, of course, kindly greet, and this will still be done in detail, of Wendelin Ettmayer, who really has a very spectacular curriculum vitae, which spans from working for many, many years for our all society in politics from 1977 onwards, with only a very short break until 1993, and then engaging in a number of very, very interesting positions as a diplomat from 1994 onwards, in areas also of multilateral diplomacy, which I am absolutely convinced must have been really fascinating times, and I would like to learn more about them when and if I get the chance to. But now, without further ado, I would like to say thank you for the attention. Also, thank you for this good start for a cooperation. And Vera, Strobachova, Budway, I would, if I may, give you the word now.
Thank you very much, David, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, and thank to the Club DA for this great cooperation. That this is our first joint activity together, and we look forward to many more. So as David said, I'm president this year of Rotary Vienna Maria Theresia, and in my spare time, I work for the OSCE. But maybe a few words about Rotary Club Vienna Maria Theresia. We are an English-speaking club. We're also the newest club here in Austria, in the district. And we were literally born here in the Diplomatic Academy. You know, the idea to form a Rotary Club that would reach out to Vienna's international community was born here. Hence, this really close tie and this unique relationship that we have with the Diplomatic Academy and with Club DA. Our members really stem from and really reflect the diversity of Vienna's international community. In addition to illustrious alumni of the Diplomatic Academy, our members come from international organizations based here in Vienna, diplomatic missions, international businesses, and other institutions. So this is, again, very special for us. And 1/3 of our membership actually are alumni from the Diplomatic Academy. The Rotary's motto is service above self. So we are a service club, and just to mention two of our service projects. One is a partnership with Rotary Club Rome International, where we provide support and scholarships for girls in Uganda, in Gulu, providing them with tuition and meals so they can attend school. I think, again, for the inclusiveness. And then a second project that we're working on and will launch hopefully soon is a mentoring program for students for the Diplomatic Academy. So without much further ado, I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker. We are really honored and delighted to have with us today Dr. Wendelin Ettmayer. His CV, really, I could spend another hour going through his CV. It is so rich and so interesting, but here are some highlights. Of course, he's an Austrian diplomat, politician, and author. He spent some time in high school as an exchange student in Austin, Minnesota, in the United States, where I come from. He graduated from the academic high school in Linz, Upper Austria, studied political science at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris, and was awarded his doctorate in law here at the University of Vienna. He graduated from the Diplomatic Academy and entered the Austrian Foreign Service. He spent 2 years in the Austrian Federal Ministry in military service, where until 1990 he served as member of the Austrian National Parliament. He was Austrian ambassador to Finland between 1994 and 1997, also accredited to Estonia. Between 2000 and 2003, he served as ambassador to Canada, also accredited to Jamaica. He headed the Department for Bilateral and Multilateral Foreign Trade Relations at the Federal Ministry for European and International Affairs between 2004 and 2005, then served as Austrian ambassador to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg between 2005 and 2008. He's the author of many books and articles, including one on U.S. military intervention in Afghanistan. So without much further ado, I would like to now invite Dr. Ettmayer here to the podium to give his talk on a very timely and provocative topic on was failure in Afghanistan inevitable? How responsible is Europe? Dr. Ettmayer, please, I invite you to come to the podium.
Well, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is great to be back again. After quite some time and all the lockdowns, you really did a marvelous job to organize this event, and I thank you, Madam President, very much, and certainly also the President of our Alumni Association, and most of all, Oliver Kitt. I think we had some great events here, in the academy, good discussions, and maybe we can do it again in the future. Today we are going to talk about or discuss, was the failure in Afghanistan inevitable? How responsible is Europe? I would like to make the following points, 5 at least. First, the war in Afghanistan was a failure. Then my second point is a question. What were the possible alternatives after the Cold War? My third point is, why is war not anymore an option in the 21st century? Fourth point, how responsible is Europe? And certainly you expect some kind of answer or solution. What could be done in the future? And my answer is to reactivate the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations. First, I must say that the war in Afghanistan was a failure. We all know that the history. America and its allies invaded Afghanistan on October 7th, 2001. Why? The reasons are also very well known. Because Osama bin Laden was the mastermind of the attacks of September 11, and the Taliban, who ruled Afghanistan in those times, provided him and his Al-Qaeda followers protection and training facilities. But, as we also remember, at least the people who are a little bit older like me, within weeks the Taliban were driven from Kabul. But what is the situation 20 years later? The results are devastating. The Taliban reconquered almost whole of Afghanistan. They re-entered Kabul, and the United States and their allies did not succeed to bring security, stability, or a strong government to Afghanistan. What does that mean? I think we all have read for years and for years the headlines coming from Afghanistan, like what I have here in Le Monde from 2017. It says, Kabul sous l'emprise de la peur. People were afraid of the désespoir. The désespoir. And they said there were again in a few months 11,500 victims. Many of them were children. Or another headline in the New York Times, even in winter, Taliban take toll on Afghanistan. And it also says that after 16 years, Afghanistan's long war shows no sign of taking a day off, even in winter time. And the same can be read again in the New York Times and time and again. So a failure because the Afghan armed forces, supported by the United States, collapsed, as we have seen during the last weeks. And the Americans, also an essential point, did not succeed to reshape Afghanistan in spite of the fact that $2 trillion were spent. Maybe someone can explain us afterwards how much that is. 2,500 American soldiers were killed, and 160,000 Afghans were killed. And most of all, and that's also a decisive point, jihadist ideology could not be contained, but spread to many places. And in 2020, America had 7,000 active troops stationed in a dozen of African countries and training missions in more than 40 countries. That means that terrorism got even stronger. So in my opinion, and that's the answer to the first question, this outcome was inevitable. It was inevitable. Why? Because the United States took the wrong decisions after the Cold War, and they followed the wrong strategy. What does that mean? Because the United States foreign policy relied and relies too much on military force. And in addition, the very specific situation in Afghanistan was not taken into account. So I do not say that in retrospect. It would be very easy to say that today after we have seen the chaos all over Afghanistan, especially in Kabul. I say that because I have written that what I have said today, my theories, for quite some time, especially in International, die Zeitschrift für internationale Politik. That's the best Austrian publication on foreign policy we have today. Danke vielmals, thank you very much that you agree. And I'm very proud that the editor-in-chief, Fritz Edlinger, is among us. And he has put quite a few copies on a table outside. You may take them. Even better it would be if you just take a subscription. So my analysis, what I'm going to say today, is not so much based on the situation in Afghanistan, but on basic trends of American foreign policy and on basic trends of international relations. It would be very easy to say all invaders of Afghanistan during the last 2,500 years, Alexander the Great and later on the British and everybody, failed. I, as I said, rather want to concentrate on the following points. What were the alternatives after the Cold War? And my answer is, there are new dimensions of security and power, new dimensions of security and power in international relations, and the United States did not take enough into consideration those new developments. One point. Another point is, a revolution in non-military affairs has taken place. And there is certainly the imperial overstretch. You were talking about liberal imperialism or not. I said there's, in any case, an overstretch. In my opinion, not so much from a geographic point of view, but concerning the great numbers of issues. And my conclusion is, concerning Europe, that the United States, in their foreign policy, should follow Europe, should follow the foreign policy of the European Union, and not the other way around. So that's my first point, was the intervention, was the war in Afghanistan a failure? Yes. Second point. What were the possible alternatives after the Cold War? Now, we are in the year 1990. The United States had just won the Cold War and became the only superpower on Earth. In this unipolar moment, neoconservative theorists and foreign policy practitioners in Washington believed that American values had finally prevailed worldwide, all over. This was also the idea put forward by Francis Fukuyama in his book, The End of History. Fukuyama, the neoconservatives, politicians in Washington, they were convinced that the end of history had come after the fall of communism, and democracy and market economy had prevailed and would prevail all over. That was one theory put forward after the Cold War. At the same time, Samuel Huntington, in his book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, saw the future of the world in a quite different way. Huntington said, future international conflicts would no longer be shaped by ideologies, but by the clash of cultures and the clash of civilizations. Huntington wrote that the belief of the West in universality of culture and values and in liberal imperialism was wrong, immoral, and dangerous. So, on the one side, you had those who believed in the final victory of Western values, who had to be spread all over, liberally or not, all over the world. And you had Huntington. He said that's all wrong, that's dangerous, and even immoral, because cultures in different parts of the world have different origins, different developments, different values. Huntington argued that one cannot demand that the whole world would adopt Western values, and he saw the wars in the Balkans, in the Middle East, and especially the attacks on 11 of September as proof of his theory. So, who was right? I think at least we can say the end of history did not happen. China took the advantage of globalization to achieve an unimagined economic growth. Russia recovered from the threat of total disintegration, and with the Islamic terror, a new danger emerged. For me, the decisive point is this: even if the end of history did not arrive, the United States shaped its policy, its foreign policy, as if this end had occurred. And where the final goal had not been achieved, the American policy was ready to enforce the laws of history by military means. That's the point. So apparently the end of history did not come, but the neoconservatives, others say, okay, maybe not quite, but we can achieve this goal. In this sense, a defense planning guidance was decreed in Washington in 1992 already, immediately after the end of the Cold War. And this defense planning guidance stipulated the following: the political and military mission of the United States to prevent the emergence of the military power of anywhere in the world must be the primary goal. So it was the military and the political mission of the United States to prevent the emergence of a military power anywhere in the world that could challenge American claims to leadership. So Washington took the decision to rely on military power in order to promote foreign policy goals and in order to achieve the end of history. Practically, the United States considered themselves as the masters of the universe. So that was my second point. The third point is, why is war not anymore an option in 20th century international relations? With the decision to take the military power as the basis of their foreign policy, the United States took the wrong choice. We have here General. I'm very happy he is here. We can discuss it afterwards. And I discuss war and peace, not from a moral point of view, but from a practical point of view. My view is that in the 21st century, war is not anymore, as Clausewitz said, it's not anymore. Clausewitz cannot be applied today. War is not anymore the prolongation of policy by other means, but war constitutes today a failure of policy. Because, and that's my argument, compared to past centuries, we now face new dimensions of security and power, and a revolution in non-military affairs has taken place. What does it mean? New dimensions of security and power in international relations. For 1,000 years, international security was primarily military security. And we all remember at school, history classes, we mostly learned of war, peace treaties, and so on. That was history. Those were the events that shaped foreign policy and history at all. A strong army should ensure that one country could not be invaded or oppressed by another. That was the traditional concept of security. And in the same way, power was military power. I dare to say that in international security traditionally was to 90% military security and only to 10% normal security. Today it is the other way around. Security in international affairs today is only to 10% military security and to 90% human security. And the same is true for power. Power today, international, is only 10% military power and 90% power exerted by other players. So what has changed? What has changed? In the past, in international relations, we had one single decisive issue. Who was the stronger? Today, that was security in the past. Who is the stronger? Today, security encompasses many aspects, practically all areas of the welfare state. From living conditions, are essential part of security, to security of the currency. During the pandemic, we have seen that questions of health are an essential part of our security, and the same can be said of the environment. Today, security is closely linked to the guarantees of human rights, to education, training, and employment. So today, as I indicated, security focuses on human security. And human security cannot be assured by armed conflicts. Human security can only be assured by cooperation and by mutual trust. And the same, what I have said about security, is true for power. In former times, power in international relations was exerted by one person, the monarch, the head of state. We still learned at university in international law, foreign policy is the domaine réservé of the head of state. Today, we have many power players. We have the NGOs, we have the old medias, the new medias, the social medias, and we have the transnational corporations. So what I dare to say concerning wars and waging wars, I said I do not talk on a moral basis, on a practical basis, because of those new dimensions of security and power, it has become much more difficult to win wars. And there's a second development, what I call the revolution in non-military affairs. If you follow the discussions in the United States, whole libraries were written about the revolution in military affairs. Revolution in military affairs means that the fact that modern technology has revolutionized warfare. According to this theory, modern weapons have reached a power never seen before, and United States armed forces have become so strong that they can conquer the whole world and the universe. So I do not contest this theory on a revolution in military. I don't know anything about technological developments. My argument is this. Okay, maybe this revolution in military affairs has taken place, but, and that's my point, at the same time, the environment in which wars are fought has also dramatically changed. And I call this the revolution in non-military affairs. The revolution in non-military affairs, which has to be taken into account if you wage war in the 21st century. So, what does it mean? Revolution in non-military affairs. For centuries, wars were an integral part of the normal life and of the normality of international relations. This is not any longer the case, because today international law prohibits the use of force. Another point, waging wars means killing and destroying. That has not changed. What is new, however, is the fact that the world is now watching. And the influence of mass media, which report directly on fighting, can hardly be overestimated. Another point. On July 1st, 2002, the International Criminal Court began its work. It punishes crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. Even if some powers did not recognize and do not recognize the International Court, its creation has made clear that wars and war crimes are no longer a normal part of international relations, whatever they say. So, and also, in my opinion, an essential point is the attitude towards heroism has changed. The attitude towards heroism has changed. Peter Moser and me, we almost at the same year, when we went to school, we still learned in Latin, Horaz, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is beautiful and glorious to die for your country. That's where the heroes are. I dare to say the view of heroes has dramatically changed. The young people, they see their heroes on the football field and not anymore on the battlefield. So again, all those developments practically had the effect that it has become much more difficult to win wars. We have this new dimension of security and power. We have the revolution in non-military affairs, and we have the imperial overstretch. Now you can say liberal overstretch or not liberal overstretch. Paul Kennedy, in his book, The Rise and Fall of Great Powers, Economic Change and Military Conflict from 1500 to 2000, spoke already about the overstretch of the foreign policy of the United States. My point here is not so much the territorial overstretch. Actually, we have approximately 800 American military bases all over the world. But I rather want to point out the overstretch concerning the goals that should be achieved by interventions and military interventions. For example, nation building, democracy building, human rights, women's rights, modernizing a society, and especially in Afghanistan, millions were spent for social engineering. The United States wanted to achieve all those goals in Afghanistan, in a society that, in my opinion, is still characterized by a pre-modern mindset of the population and also of the elites. What does it mean, a pre-modern mindset? It means that power in those places still relies with the tribal chiefs and not with a centralized government. And where corruption apparently is still considered as a normal way of doing business. And this I can say, whoever studied history can see that nation building in Europe took hundreds of years, and could not be achieved by a military intervention in a few months or in a few years. So again, my conclusion is the failure of the US military policy in Afghanistan was inevitable because they did not take care of all those developments, all those changes, all those dramatic changes that had taken place. My fourth point is, how responsible is Europe? The answer is, Europeans are responsible for the fiasco in Afghanistan because the great majority of European leaders, the European media, NATO, supported US foreign policy unconditionally. And that's why they are responsible. In reality, the new European approach to international relations, as we practice it, would show the right way. And my conclusion, therefore, is the Americans should follow the European approach of international relations and not the other way around, as it is written now in almost all the newspapers. What do I mean? You can read all over that Europe is no longer of relevance in the world, no longer of relevance in international affairs, because the European states have lost military strength and are not arming enough. That's the genuine argument. And indeed, with the founding of the Council of Europe in 1949 and intensified by the European Union, and that's my point now, a revolution in European diplomacy took place. This revolution in European diplomacy means that in Europe now we have new goals of foreign policy and new means. Goals and means in European policy among European states have changed dramatically. What does that mean? Traditional foreign policy was power politics for 1,000 years. As I said before, that was based on military power. The goal of foreign policy for 1,000 years was to increase the power of the state and the glory of the monarch, who was considered great in history. Those who conquered from Alexander the Great to Frederick the Great, and who, by military means, achieved a stronger position of their own country. Just to demonstrate to what extent also public opinion has changed, when Milosevic, the Serbian president, started to conquer or to attack his neighbors, nobody said Milosevic the Great, but they said Milosevic should be immediately sent to the War Tribunal to The Hague. So a revolution has taken place in European diplomacy concerning the goals of our foreign policy and concerning the means. The means were realpolitik, raison d'etat, and war. That means whatever you did in the name of your country, even if it was criminal, considered from a private point of view, doing it for the state, it was even a great honor to do it. So after the Second World War, the goals of foreign policy became changed. And for the European countries, and very happy that a few ambassador colleagues are here and diplomats, when we were sent to other countries, nobody said you have to try to improve the Austrian power position in your host country. But what we had to do is to contribute to the well-being of our people. So the goals of our foreign policy became increase the well-being of the population. Warfare was replaced by welfare, and confrontation was replaced by cooperation. And doing this, Europe became a continent of peace, prosperity, and human rights. And in my opinion now, it is totally wrong to say that Afghanistan and all the other examples show that we have to do more. We have to do more for our military forces and to use them more in our foreign policy. I think it should be the other way around, and Europe should serve as an example. So, my last point. What can be a solution? I'm totally convinced only proclaiming human rights and cooperation, you cannot deal with failed states, you cannot deal with terrorists or with organized crime. So what could be a solution concerning those facts of realpolitik? I recommended European peaceful solutions. But the question is what to do with those who do not live up with our values and disturb international peace and security, who violate basic rights or violate the basic rights of their own people, who sponsor terrorism and organized crime. And my answer in this case is the following. We have to reactivate the trusteeship system of the United Nations. So I do not want to examine or ask what you have learned about the United Nations in international law, but I dare to say this. When we learned about the United Nations, we always heard about six organs of these international organizations. But practically, we only learned about 5. We learned about the General Assembly, the Security Council, ECOSOC, and so on. Why? Because this trusteeship system, which is also mentioned in the Charter of the United Nations, did not function anymore after the Second World War. That was taken over from the League of Nations, but it still occupies quite a part of the Charter of the United Nations. For example, Chapter 11, Declaration regarding non-self-governing territories. Chapter 12, the International Trusteeship System. Chapter 13, the Trusteeship Council. That was established in 1919. And the purpose of this system was to supervise non-self-governing territories in Africa, the Middle East, the Pacific, and to advance the inhabitants of those territories to all their rights. So that was the purpose in 1919. But for decades now, as I said, the Trusteeship Council has lost any function as all those territories have become independent. And now my proposal is to reinvigorate, to reactivate this Trusteeship Council concerning states which support terrorism, failed states, or states that organize criminal activities. Yeah? So, and exactly like it was intended originally, the international law should be enforced with the help of this Trusteeship Council. And broken communities should be helped to move towards stability, prosperity, and the rule of law. It is very clear that this is interference in domestic affairs, absolutely. But the question is, what is better? This kind of interference in domestic affairs by the United Nations, or imperialistic interference by one big state, or to see millions suffer mass poverty, ethnic slaughter, or the violation of human rights. So those would be the points I wanted to make. Again, for me, I think I can agree on that, right, to quite an extent. The failure of the war in Afghanistan was inevitable, which, by the way, was quite often not called a war, but a stability mission, like liberal stability mission. Europe is responsible, and we should draw the right conclusions, not only concerning Afghanistan, and that's my point when I said the Trusteeship Council should be reactivated, but we should draw the right conclusion concerning the whole international system and the way we conduct international relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very thought-provoking and provocative, stimulating talk. Now, of course, I'm sure many of you have questions for Ambassador Ettmayer. So I'm going to now open the floor for your thoughts, for your questions, and please. Please.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for your interesting speech. I agree with many points you mentioned. Of course, I disagree with some of them.
You can just,
you
are general.
I don't want to give a co-speech, so to say. Just have one question, so to say. Please, could you a little bit enlighten more what you mean by European foreign policy? I hardly see anyone common European foreign policy. And the second is how to deal with aggressive states. We see, for instance, China, who is not really using its military power, but with its military power, so to say, in its spec, he is threatening his neighbors and is in relatively violent politics, so to say, dealing in his area. How to deal with this kind of policy if you say the international law should solve it? Okay. And the third would be, you would need a total reorganization of the United Nations if you were to reestablish this system you mentioned, because the veto power could, so to say, block everything.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can answer it immediately. The first point is, what do I mean by European foreign policy? I essentially mean the foreign policy between European countries. So not the external foreign policy, but what I mean is that we succeeded in Europe to substitute warfare through welfare, that traditional enemies like France and Germany could become friends, hereditary enemies like Austria and Italy could become friends. So when I talk about revolution in European affairs, I mean revolution in diplomacy among European countries. First point. The second point is China and great power policy. It is true that realpolitik, power politics exist. But my point now is this. The United Nations, after 1945, also had quite different intentions. As it turned out, after the Cold War, after the Cold War. The Americans were really convinced the unipolar moment would give them the chance to dominate the world. My point now is this. Throughout history, you could start now with the Spanish War of Succession and the Peace of Utrecht, the Napoleonic Wars and the Congress of Vienna, the First World War, League of Nations. After every great conflict, especially military conflict, the powers tried to establish a new international order. That was not done after the great victory in the Cold War. After the Cold War, the United Nations system, which was established after the previous war, the Second World War, was practically prolonged. And I think it is high time that we reshape this whole system that was established in 45, especially as far as also internal interventions are concerned. As far as I know, the Charter of the United Nations still stipulates it is absolutely forbidden to intervene in internal affairs and so on. That's a long time, it's not anymore the case. So two things. I disagree with the American fundamental belief that you only have good and evil in the world. So practically there must be some evil people. There must be some evil. Nowadays the Chinese and Putin, he is the worst. So I disagree with this kind of, I do not defend them. But I say this belief in good and evil is deeply rooted in Calvinistic Anglo-Saxon thinking. And George W. Bush, who started the war against Afghanistan, he was not the first who talked about the axis of evil. You know who was the first who talked about the axis? Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, in 1656. He said, England has to fight against the axis of evil. And luckily he found out that the interests of England and the interests of the Almighty God were practically the same. And the axis of evil in those days, you could have been among them, were the Habsburgs, the Pope, and the Catholics. So I disagree. I disagree with this worldview that if I represent the good side, the other one must be the evil. So I think that that's also what Europe, to quite some extent, tries to do, to cooperate and to solve international problems by cooperation. And I dare to say, if you consider half the world as criminals, Putin is a criminal and others are criminals, okay, it's a very difficult, it's not a basis to solve international problems and to cooperate. So I think we need a different approach. And it must be allowed to say that. And I am rather critical. rather critical of some of those people who don't dare to say, to deviate from the American point of view.
Thank you. I found interesting your clarification that you did not mean there is a external foreign policy of the European Union, but only between the countries.
Yes.
In my opinion, this is exactly the problem. There is not an external foreign policy. There is no external security policy, and the European Union is simply completely helpless. And you gave one example, not to demonstrate it, but I am using it to demonstrate. You remember in 1995, the genocide of Srebrenica, which was in fact the fruit of Milosevic policy. Who stopped it after that? Who stopped Milosevic? Not the European Union, but the United States. And there are, I think, many other examples where it is only a dream that one could do without some measurements to stop conflicts which are rather hard. For instance, I agree with you that there is not a sharp border between what is military, what is non-military. And that's exactly the problem, that if you use cyber war to destroy some essential infrastructure in a different country, what is this? War or not war? Or if the Chinese occupy so-called unpopulated or undefined territories in the South China Sea, this occupation is done absolutely with military means. They establish military bases. So I think that although you have a dream, I'm not sure that your dream will be realized so soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As far as European foreign policy is concerned, we could talk a whole evening about it. The problem, in my opinion, is this. To quite an extent, in the European Union, we have given up national sovereignty, but we did not create European sovereignty. We have given up the currency, we have given up the border control. I don't talk about the situation now, but we did not succeed to establish a European sovereignty. That's absolutely right. Okay, as far as the South China Sea is concerned, we could discuss it. I mean, sometimes the Americans act as if it were the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, the Chinese do not send their airplane carriers to the Chesapeake Bay, but the Americans send their airplane carriers to the South China Sea. So the question is, to what extent national interests can still be allowed? For example, Hillary Clinton, as foreign secretary, once said, the time of national interests is gone. That was the Secretary of State of the United States says. So that's certainly an area that's open to question. But in general, I would say that those power political initiatives should be taken over as it was originally envisaged by the United Nations.
I have a very stupid question, but I think I have a very clever defense of that stupid question. The other day, I was asking myself, is it a left-wing or right-wing position to not want to tolerate the Taliban regime?
What to not to tolerate?
If somebody said, I do not want to tolerate the Taliban, I wish there were an intervention, would that person be a left-wing or right-wing person? It's not obvious, right? And indeed, because you mentioned Fukuyama and Huntington, one of the things that happened in roughly '89 is that before that, it was possible for people to defend dictatorships, non-democratic governments outside of the West, saying, well, perhaps those people like that. Perhaps for some reason it's behooves the Chinese soul to live under dictatorship. And people would say, well, they have a dictatorship, but their standards in medicine are better than, for example, in India. And that is no longer the case, right? And so what happened in 2000 and 2003 with the Bush administration is that you had those neoconservatives who claimed themselves to have been former left-wingers who now, for some reason or another, ended up with the Republican Party and said essentially they're still following the same politics as always, wanting to have democracy for everybody, right? And that idea that, well, democracy might not be right for some people because, let's say, the Chinese soul is against democracy, that argument was dead, right? And so what we see now is it's not the case that the Taliban have won the war in the sense that they have laid siege on Washington, right? It is not the case that the United States has run out of manpower or run out of airplanes or run out of ammunition. They could go on for another 30 years without a problem. It's not the case that Americans have protested in the millions in America against the war, right? The reason why the Americans decided to just get out of Afghanistan is because they do not no longer know why they would want to be there, right? And so I was the other day looking for discussions about Afghanistan on the internet, on YouTube, and looked for long discussions, and 80% of the hits I found were discussions from India. This is a major deal for India. This is a major deal for India. It's actually caused a political crisis, right? Because of strategic positions and because the new regime is so close to Pakistan. You've perhaps heard that today there were protests in Afghanistan against Pakistan. And I think the mess we're in is that globally, we haven't decided whether concerning other countries in the world outside of Europe, outside of the West, we prefer the ones that are stable or the ones that are democratic. Because if we, for example, look at India, there are sanctions against India more than there are against China, right? But at the same time, or at least 20 years ago, America was invading Afghanistan for the sake of democracy, right? And we've seen this year the destruction of democracy in Tunisia, which had the sanction of the West. I'm sorry. That's basically it. Isn't it the case that we have to make up our minds what we want, whether we want to support this side or the other side?
Okay, I dare to say, the one question is, what do I want? And the other, what is the reality? I mean, I could wish a utopian world. Huh? And that's why I mentioned Fukuyama and Huntington. There are different views. The one says, practically, we have already achieved our goals, or we can very soon achieve them. And the others say, no, the contrary. Now, the different roots of the civilizations will be shown more clearly. I think that those are the different views that exist. Huh? And the question is, how do I adapt? And to what extent, how do I react? Huh? And by what means do I want to change another society? For example, if you take, you mentioned India, you can take a look at Vietnam. Huh? The Americans fought the Vietnam War, it was a bloody war, and now apparently, as far as I see, there's a rather close cooperation between the United States and Vietnam. It's always also a question of goals and of means.
Yeah, good evening. I'm one of the Rotary members present this evening. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. We have seen the introduction of the Taliban government today. Yeah. I dare to say government.
I watched CNN to the last moment to be up to date when I talk to you.
And the Prime Minister to be and some other ministers, for example, the Minister of Interior, Haqqani, who is head of a terrorist network and on the list of terrorist networks in the United States. So what, from your extensive experience as diplomat, what would be your advice to the Western European or to European leaders and the United States how to approach now in practical means the new Taliban government, sending money, sending no money? How would you propose the steps?
Okay, I'm not in a position to advise anyone, but I would say, first of all, wait and see. Wait and see. And the second approach I usually take is this. What attitudes, now I'm practically almost the oldest in this group. Huh? How did we react 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when we say the Taliban have to behave exactly the way we now behave in 21? How did we react in 61, in 71? Huh? So I do not say, don't misunderstand me, the Taliban, we should look back. But what I want to say is that our behavior, our approach to politics, our approach to freedom, our approach to liberalism, our approach to religious freedom, it has not always been the same. Huh? And for hundreds of years, the Catholic Church, for example, was strongly against the liberty of religion, of religious choice. So I think we must accept that people, that civilizations live in different times. Huh? And we all know how Europe developed and what kinds of wars we were waging, and what attitude we had to social behavior and to civil society. That was totally different from what we think today. So I do not try to justify, but what I want to say is that we have also evolved, and we should help them to evolve. And as long as those states, those governments are not hostile, I see no reason why we couldn't cooperate.
Excuse me, Dr. Ettmayer, why are the United Nations so helpless in solving such problems? Always ask for the Americans or for the British. It's a task for the United Nations to act as such. They have all countries surrounding, they spend a lot of money, they get a lot of money, but what do they really? What have they done in this conflict?
Okay. I want just a short answer. Why are the United Nations? I don't know if they ask for American intervention, but why are they helpless? Because the whole concept turned out to in a different way. The United Nations practically were established in San Francisco in 45, 46, and on a concept of cooperation. And very soon, during the Cold War, it turned out to be a concept of confrontation. And the 5 members, the permanent members of the Security Council, were supposed to take care of the security and the peace in the world. But because the concept evolved in a totally different way. And that's why I say it would be time for fundamental discussion to reshape the whole system. That's my point.
Ingolf Schützmüller, 6. Lehrgang. I was the United Nations resident coordinator in Afghanistan during the Russian occupation, Soviet occupation. Just very quickly to give my point of view to the last question, why is the United Nations not doing anything? The organ of the United Nations, which is responsible for these kind of things, is the Security Council. And the Security Council, please don't quote me, but is not actually a UN organ. All what the United Nations are doing, they are renting them a room, a hallway, and a couple of secretaries, so that these 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members can decide. If they cannot decide, the United Nations cannot do anything. That is the secret to the problems. And when we hear about the United Nations in the media, it's 90% always things which the Security Council was unable to resolve. And this, I think, the blame should not go to the United Nations, because that is it's the problem which existed since the beginning of the UN. But let me just say a few words to how I experienced the Soviet occupation during that time. In 1984, the Soviet ambassador came to my home, not to my office, because he was afraid that somebody might listen to it. And he said, please don't talk to anybody about this, but I'm coming here in desperation. We, the Soviet Union, made a big mistake entering Afghanistan. We cannot win this war, and this was only 5 years after they came. And nobody else will be able to do that militarily. So that supports, in a way, your thinking that wars will hopefully not anymore be a tool for the future. So, and then he asked, could you help, could the United Nations help us to leave the country in a face-saving modality, which was very, very difficult for us. I had to go back several times to New York and many meetings with the Secretary General and so on. And because the United Nations condemned, of course, the Soviet Union troops in Afghanistan. And one of the reasons why I was there was because I was from a neutral country, and that was just acceptable to the Soviet Union, and it was also acceptable, of course, to the Western powers. So what we did was, after many deliberations, we told the Soviet Union what they should do is, at least in the areas where they were in power, it was actually only the 3 cities, Kandahar, Herat, and Kabul, to do as many as possible social projects, schools, women, you name it. And actually, they did it. They could, of course, not have any success in the rural areas, but they did that in the cities. And actually, 5 years later, when they left, it was not such a catastrophic leave as we had in Saigon with the Americans. And actually, it was much more peaceful than what happened now in these days. But I'm as a real pacifist, I always thought that the only justifiable war after World War II was actually the war of the NATO in terms of getting rid of the Taliban, because of course I had lots of information. It was really so incredibly brutal what happened in those 5 years when they were there, that I think if one would know all these details, one has to agree to the move which the Americans made. Now, the big problem was that after 1 or 2 years, their interest moved to Iraq, and suddenly Afghanistan was forgotten. The Taliban were completely out, and the most important thing was the population actually loved what happened. The population was all in favor because they suffered a lot. I mean, rural, urban areas, they suffered a lot, and they were very, very happy that the NATO countries had come. But for the next 10 years, the Americans totally ignored Afghanistan and just dealt with Iraq. And that was the big problem. Otherwise, this war might have been won. What happened in the last 10 years is very typical. Americans did not realize what the way was, what the way would be to help this country to stand on its own feet, namely by letting the tribal regions organize themselves, and not do the Americans put in place the mayors in the towns, in the provinces and everything, people who they thought they could trust, because this automatically made them as enemies of the people. It was the same during the Russian occupation. President Barbara Kemal then was hated by the population because he went together with a foreign power. And the same applied during the last 10 years. And so that was what was basically the big mistake. And what the Taliban did in the last 5-10 years, very, very cleverly, they took out individually all those leaders in in towns, in little villages. They didn't attack the population as much, but they killed each one of them. So saying by that, anybody who would like to become a leader and is supported by the United States will fail. And that was so terrorizing for the people that they all lost hope that there would be any chance that they could withstand the Taliban. And that is why the military collapsed. And I think it would be a totally wrong assumption to say, these are cowards. How is it possible that the military collapsed so quickly? The Afghans are incredibly brave fighters. We know this from the Panjshir Valley 20 years ago and so on, and from all the history. But the way it was done by the Western countries, NATO, was unfortunately the wrong way. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a very provocative and inspiring discussion, specifically on the points of internationalism and instant nation building, as I come from the region which still suffers and suffered a lot in the past of this kind of behavior. Returning back to Afghanistan, obviously we have a new reality now present. Which challenges you would find from tomorrow for the European and overall security that needs to be tackled by international community? Thank you.
But concerning Afghanistan?
Yeah, concerning Afghanistan.
I think as far as Afghanistan is concerned, thank you very much for your very interesting explanation. I think the challenges are twofold. How inclusive will the policy of the Taliban be? And the other one is the external question. What will be the reaction of the international community? I think that we will see in the near future. And as it was also mentioned, I mean, states like Pakistan, India, they are directly involved. So, but the main question will be, what will be their concept for internal development?
So thank you so much for a very exciting and thought-provoking conversation. We were really honored that you were here, that we could do this together with the Club DA. And before you leave, just a second, we have a little thank you for you. All right, and thank you all for coming and for participating, and let's move next door for a glass of wine and some snacks.